Well, it's the most brilliant idea in my lifetime, and maybe the most brilliant idea of all time, and now it looks like they're just determined to screw it up. Everybody, I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Ott, and this is your right angle on the latest with Uber, which is about to launch its IPO, its initial public offering. It's expected to hit the market at a value somewhere around $90 billion. 90B. Not a bad number, actually. The reason I think that Uber is the best idea I've seen in my lifetime, and maybe the best idea ever, is twofold. First of all, we didn't know we needed Uber until Uber arrived. Now, obviously, if you live in the country, this is not going to be such a big deal to you. But for those of us who live in cities, ride sharing has really just changed the world. I never go to a restaurant now with my own car. It's going to cost about as much to park it and stuff, and I can have a drink or two, drive home, and not worry about it. Somebody will be at my door in 3 minutes. I know where the car is. It's absolutely brilliant. But the thing that's especially brilliant about Uber, I think, and why it may be the best idea ever, was because it didn't cost anything. I mean, surely it took a little bit to develop the app and so on, but if you think about the genius of Uber, it's not like Uber said, we've got to go out and we're going to change the way Americans travel. We need to buy 100,000 cars and start in a city. Somebody realized there are people out there with cars who need some money, and then there are people out there who have a little bit of money who need a ride, and it put them together. And it's simply brilliant, and it's worth $90 billion. But here's the thing. The article that keyed this off is from The Guardian. It says, they treat us like crap. Uber drivers feel poor and powerless on the eve of IPO. And having ridden in Uber several times, I found that drivers are also, the ones that I've met, pretty disheartened by the way they're being treated by Uber. And I wanted to talk about this, guys, not just in relation to Uber, but in relation to business in general. Steve, let's start with you. I remember somebody told me something really profound once, and they said that Ronald Reagan, it's a little messianic, but what the hell, is that Ronald Reagan wasn't sent to us to save us from liberals. He was sent to save us from crony capitalists. And I thought that's actually quite a profound thing to say. And what the person went on to elaborate was to say that without the evils of capitalism, you have no need for socialism whatsoever. I don't think there's any comparison between the two systems, but if you're free to do whatever you want to, which is what capitalism is, you're going to find people who are going to be exploitative. You're going to find people who are going to be cruel, who are going to be all of these things. Now, in a modern market, you can just go someplace else. But for a company whose product is the experience, it doesn't seem to me like a good idea to go out there and mop up $90 billion and have the people who are the entire product, which is the Uber drivers, filled with resentment and anger and frustration, especially when that number actually hits the market and people say, oh, so they got $90 billion and I'm stuck here doing this. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that there needs to be any government intervention, needless to say. And as I've always said, if you don't want to drive for Uber, then don't. That's your personal decision. I'm speaking about it as a business decision. I think it's an exceedingly bad idea and very poor management.
It is. It's short-sighted. You know, I can't even remember who the CEO is of Uber. It's not the guy who started the place. He got forced out or sidelined or something, because it turns out he's really just a horrible person. And I thought maybe getting him out of the way would result in a better corporate culture. And if today's news is anything to go by, it really hasn't. I mentioned this backstage. I love Uber. I love Lyft. If I'm up in Denver, that's what I use. If I'm traveling, that's what I use. It's wonderful. But these stories have been coming out for long enough now that I made a decision. It was probably about middle of last year or so to use Lyft whenever possible instead of Uber. But as I was saying, I don't know who the CEO is. I don't know who's handling the IPO. I don't know any of these details. I don't have to. I know Uber through the drivers. That is my contact point with the company. It's like walking into a restaurant where they know you and they treat you well. If your Uber driver is a great guy or a great gal, then you're thinking, wow, this is a great company. But if that driver is unhappy, you think, wow, this is not a great company. Let me give you a real world example. My grandfather had a small steel service company in St. Louis called Southwest Steel Supply. I don't know, probably 40, 50 employees if I had to guess. And a lot of these guys were union guys, and I cannot exaggerate just how much my grandfather hated the Teamsters. He estimated that just staying in compliance with regulations and dealing with the unions took up about 30% of his time. I said, well, what would you do if you didn't have the unions or all the regulations to deal with? And he said, well, either the company would be 30% bigger, and that's 30% more jobs, or I would have 30% more free time. And you could tell he was a little resentful that he couldn't have either one of these choices. He had a Teamster strike during a big steel shortage in the early 70s when prices were going through the roof, and they just wanted to staple his you-know-what to the wall with permanent contracts, so we're going to far outlive this temporary steel shortage. And he broke the strike. He had sales guys out on the shop floor cutting steel while the Teamsters were picketing. I mean, he just hated the union and all the money and aggravation that they caused him every single day of the work week. That said, when times were temporarily flush, he broke a strike in order to keep the business solvent when times wouldn't be so flush. And when business got bad shortly thereafter, the shortage was followed by this huge steel glut, and suddenly your inventory was practically worthless. Management would take a 10% pay cut across the board before he would lay off a single Teamster from the shop floor, because he knew who cut his steel that he had to sell to his customers, and it was those union guys on the shop floor. He might not have liked the union, but he respected the hell out of the people who worked for him.
Scott, it's an interesting analogy, because it touches on something we talked a little bit about backstage. But before I ask you this question, the thing that is so interesting about this is, I understand how in many businesses, if you raise your employee's salary by 2%, you're out of business. I mean, I understand the margins and how thin the margins are. But when you really get right down to it, Uber doesn't cost Uber anything, right? I mean, this is basically what I'm trying to say. You've got people who are providing their own cars, their own time. Uber has the administrative overhead, yes. But it's not like Uber is shelling out incredible amounts of money for warehouse space or inventory or even advertising, really, you know? And so to be having your drivers be so miserable about how you're being treated, when it seems to me that this is one example where raising the compensation of your employees is essentially improving your product. I just don't understand it. And we talked before the show about how good management is just the opposite of this. Good management treats their employees as if they were their primary asset. And I mentioned that when Southwest Airlines was looking at the collapse of air travel right after 9/11, that the president of Southwest Airlines said, first of all, we're not going out of business. Secondly, we're not firing anybody. Third, we're going to stick to this together. I'm going to make $1 a year until we get out of this. And his people would go to hell for him. You told me another story that I'd never heard before. So why is it so hard to see the benefits of good management for people who certainly must be smart enough to know better?
Well, there are a couple of factors here. Number one, everyone is greedy. The people who are driving the cars are greedy. The people who are making the decisions in the corner office are greedy. All of us are greedy. And
what you say, we're self-interested.
Yeah, that's what I said. We're greedy. And so we want as much as we can get. Now, that in a capitalist system without government meddling eventually balances out and finds its own level like water does. And, you know, you can only get so much before you're no longer of value to the organization and they have to let you go. And so, you know, there's an old story years ago when somebody was bragging about how he wasn't getting paid what he was worth at the company. And they said, well, why are you bragging about that? And he said, the day they start paying me what I'm worth is the day they fire me. He said, I've always got to be paid less than I'm worth, or else there's no profit in having me here. So, you know, if you understand how capitalism works, then as a manager, you're always trying to fine tune that recipe and say, okay, you know, obviously, wouldn't it be great if we can pay everybody $200,000 a year, but that's not really practical. So what is the level at which we can keep good people but not overpay them, return an investment to our investors, provide interest for them, be able to make the kinds of expenditures we need to operate the business itself. And one of the things you just pointed out, Bill, was something that I made a note of while you were talking. I just got done reading a book about Pixar, the company that was essentially that Steve Jobs ran for a while he was running Apple as well. And one of the things that was a big deal at Pixar was that these people who had slaved away for many years before they ever released a feature film at Pixar wanted to be compensated for the time they put in at relatively low wages and the devotion that they had expressed. And so the only way to do that really is to do an IPO, because then the stock options, which they had been granted at a particular price, would be more valuable than that, and they could exercise those options and make a lot of money. It occurs to me, though, that when Pixar does an IPO, they pour that money into the production of additional films, and it's a very expensive process to make an additional film. But Uber is an app. I mean, I'm not saying
that's my point. There's no cost.
Yes, I'm not saying that there's no other costs. I'm sure there are other costs involved, and there's overhead involved in it, and maybe they have to pay for servers or whatever.
Of course.
But the $90 billion is really going straight to the pockets of the investors. It's in many ways, it's just a cash out for the investors. And when you've got that kind of a situation, I think you need to go back and fine tune that, especially when you have a competitor like Lyft, and the only really ride sharing I've ever done outside of when I came to visit you in Los Angeles, Bill, was a Lyft ride because my truck broke down. See, that's why people in Texas would take a ride sharing ride, is because the truck broke down. That's exactly right. But when I did that, the woman who was driving told me that she had quit her nursing job because she was doing so well at Lyft. And that's ideally what you want, because I literally looked at that and thought, maybe I should be driving for Lyft too. That sounds like a lucrative career. And so you attract more people that way. If you want to ruin your business, if you want to ruin your industry like the insurance industry has, just constantly screw the people that you rely upon to be able to have a business. And whether that's the customers in the case of the insurance industry, or the doctors that are completely overwhelmed with the bureaucracy of dealing with that, or in this case, the drivers, the frontline facing people, every dollar that you don't have to spend on advertising because that driver is making the impression for you ought to, 50 cents of that ought to go into the driver's pocket.
They are the product. Yeah,
that's right.
I brought this story up because to those who may look at it on the surface and say, well, geez, Bill, that's an anti-capitalist position to take. The investors put the money in and they should be entitled to all the returns possible. I said, look, I completely agree. As an enormous fan and longtime defender of capitalism, I like capitalism and I like to see it work. And I hate to see people make stupid decisions because, number one, I don't like to watch waste, but number two, it gives the left something to cry about. A well-run business in a world of well-run businesses, there would be no need for the left. So two very quick stories from my father, who was a hotel manager, that taught me what I need to know about management and looking at the long-term game rather than the short-term game. Scott had mentioned trying to squeeze everything out of this property, and now that you've got this money, we're going to take all this money out of it and squeeze the employees and so on. I remember being about 7 years old at dinner at the hotel my father was a manager of, and at the table next to me, I was just sitting there and listened to a man order chicken piccata, let's say. Yes, and so I'm just minding my own business. This superb waiter comes by, puts down the chicken piccata. The customer says, "I didn't order chicken piccata. I ordered filet mignon." And the waiter says, "I'm sorry, sir, excuse me." And before you could say another word, my dad just eventually just rises from his table, hovers over there. "Is there a problem?" And the customer says, "Yes, I ordered filet mignon, and this is the chicken piccata." And my father said, "I'm terribly sorry, sir. Please excuse us for our mistake. We'll get this back in the kitchen right away. Get your filet mignon out here for you as fast as we can. And would you please allow the hotel to buy a round of drinks for your inconvenience?" And I'm about to say something, and he's almost like, "Bill, shut up, don't say a word." And the people were very grateful, and off they went. And after they left, I said to my dad, "Dad, I heard them order chicken piccata." He says, "Of course they did, Bill. This guy, Angelo, I brought him in from Italy. He's the best waiter on the continent of Europe. He doesn't make mistakes like this." I said, "Why did you do it?" And he said, "Because I had a choice. I can either argue with this guy and and make sure that he never comes back here again and never has any of his friends come back here again. And I might have saved maybe $20. The chicken piccata went back to the people in the back who got a nice dinner. It wasn't touched by anybody. Or I could sacrifice the $20 now and have him bring $20,000 worth of business and all of his friends as well for the rest of his life. And I'm not going to make a stupid decision like that. I thought, how hard is this to figure out? How hard is it? The second story is even much briefer, and that's simply this. When my father was hosting a bunch of college students who were hoping to become hotel managers, he was showing them through the hotel one day, and they asked him, in a very self-serving manner, so, Mr. Whittle, who's the most important person in the hotel? Needless to say, they were all expecting him to say, well, the hotel managers, obviously. That's what they all wanted to be, was hotel managers. And my father, without batting an eye, said, oh, it's the front doorman without any question. Without any question, it's the front doorman. Our front door gentleman is able to remember visitors who haven't been here for 6 years. And he can remember the names of their kids and where they're from and what they were doing. He said when he greets them at the hotel, these people feel like they're coming home. He said, Bill, a hotel room is a television set and a bed. And everything else is dependent on how you're made to feel here. And if it feels like home, you'll come back. So this is what I grew up with. And anytime I see something short-sighted like this, stupid like this, it makes me angry, because you are going to simply ruin a good idea. Somebody else will do it better. Maybe that's Lyft or someone else. But for God's sakes, the lesson of the goose that laid the golden eggs is you get a golden egg every single day, forever. And the idea of cutting that thing open to get maybe 2 or 3 eggs is not just insanity, it's venality, and it's kind of a sin. Anyway, that's what I think about the whole thing, and that's our right angle for this week, made possible by the paying members at BillWhittle.com. It's a family, and it's the very best people I know, and if you're one of those very good people, you might want to think about joining us over there. So Scott pointed out, his amazing work he's done on the website means that there's such a vibrant community of members actually posting these stories that we're all just completely blown away with. So we couldn't be happier, and we'd love to have you join us. Until next time, I'm Bill Whittle here for Steve Green and Scott Ott. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next right angle.